Liberals spend big with Meta. Carney's going to the White House. Canadian economy in trouble. And the Green leader wants to be speaker. All that and more on the Really Big Show this morning. I'm Jim Csek with NowMedia. On the phone with me, Iain Burns, all the way from our nation's capital. Another glorious day here in the Okanagan. Look at that sky and look at the traffic moving. The trees are greening up. Again, beautiful, beautiful day here in the Okanagan. Almost 10 degrees here right now in Kelowna. How's things looking out there in the nation's capital?
Well, it's similar into right now anyway. It's quite sunny. It's about sort of 10 or 11, but there's rain in the forecast, and I don't think we're going to see the sun again for another sort of 10 days or something like that. So I'm bracing myself.
Well, there you go. Let's get right into it. The Liberals and the Liberal government had this boycott on Meta, and they have all this language about supporting local and supporting Canada and supporting like Canadian-made companies and all this stuff. And they've been spending like crazy on the evil empire, as they called it, Meta.
Well, they implied. Yeah, I don't know if they actually used that term, but they certainly said it spreads misinformation, disinformation, it's dangerous, it's irresponsible, it's the nasty mega capitalists from the US and all the rest of it. And then went and dropped millions of dollars on it, obviously, as you do.
And they also picked that fight with Meta, which turned into a news ban on Meta, the only G7 nation to not allow news on Facebook or Instagram, to the detriment of media outlets across Canada who've lost half their traffic and half their revenue. And yet here it is, when Justin Trudeau said that he would never, never back down to Meta and boycott, the boycott would stand. But here they go, spending money like crazy. $5.4 million.
Facebook for me, but not for thee.
There you go.
That's what it amounts to, isn't it? It's like, sorry, I'm sorry you can't use Facebook, Jim, or any other news outlet. Really sorry about that. But I'm the Liberal Party of Canada. I'm actually a politician. I don't know if you know, but I'm a pretty big guy. I'm a pretty important person. So obviously I have to use Facebook. But I mean, you're just going to have to suck it up, my obedient servant.
Well, close to 100 outlets have failed across Canada because of this Facebook ban, this Bill C-18 ban, and more failing. And half the traffic across almost all media outlets have lost half their traffic because of this Facebook ban. And when they broke their boycott, their reasoning was that they recognized that social media is an important place to get news, so they had no choice but to go back to Meta and start paying, because that's the only way to get their information on Meta. Sometimes I think I woke up in a crazy house. The logic just blows me away.
Well, I don't think we're seeing much in the way of strong principles here, are we? It's just sheer gruesome, unadorned Machiavellianism, basically. It's just power. This is just the hideousness of power and what it does to people when they seek it. They just completely abandon their principles. They do whatever it is they need to. And talking about principles, and talking about not the Liberals necessarily here, but the media, I would advise anybody to go and have a look on Google, or since Google's a waste of time, ChatGPT or something like that, and have a little search. See if you can find many stories on this subject, specifically this one that we're discussing. And I can, I mean, unless you're better at searching than I am, you're not going to find a single one. It's just us. And the reason for that is because so many outlets are in on the shakedown.
Yeah, they're in on the take. The Liberals had pledged to boycott Meta, with former Minister Pablo Rodriguez insisting the federal government would cancel roughly $10 million of advertising to support local media. And that stand didn't last long, though, right? Privy Council telling NowMedia early last month that Ottawa had spent over $1 million lifting the boycott in late January. And this is the part that just is absolutely ludicrous. Added that social media remains a primary source of information for many, yet news outlets across Canada can't share their information on their primary source for many. And we've tried to get an answer. And we're trying to get answers. We're sending Kent again to get an answer from our local, now elected Liberal MP, who also spent $20,000 with Meta during the election and spent zero with us.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to understand, isn't it, in the context of the Liberal campaign, which was essentially, I would say, 90% focused on a kind of anti-American patriotism,
Yeah.
and all about Canada strong, elbows up, invest in Canada and all the rest of it, Canadian products. But this is what I mean when it comes to actual real power. When real power is on the line, they weren't willing to follow along with those principles. And this is a lesson. This is a lesson for anybody that's still naive enough to actually believe that there's any honor or principles in politics. There's none. There is none. If you think you're going to join a political party, it's not just Liberals, it's the NDP, it's the Greens, it's the Conservatives, it's all of them. If you think you're going to join a political party and you're going to be surrounded by idealistic do-gooders who like live or die by their principles, then I would say, wake up. Don't waste your time. That's not what politics is about. It's about often grubby little people with very ugly personalities that want power over other people. And this is what it looks like. Say one thing, do another. Complete hypocrisy, and then just sort of walk away and laugh. Which is, if you read the comment that I got from the Liberal Party, that's basically just a kind of, they just laughed in my face, and that's what it looks like. No question, nothing to say about principles, nothing to say about Facebook, nothing to say about the obvious hypocrisy. Just see you later. We're great.
Yeah, so when I did the interviews for the federal election there, I brought it up with Liberal candidate Juliette Sicot, and she was, she didn't know a lot about it. She was kind of shocked and said this is terrible and that it should be repealed. I brought it up to the NDP candidate, and he didn't understand it. I explained it to him. And the only people that I know of that were familiar with it and understood it were the Conservative candidates in the local area, and that mainly, I would say, is because we've educated them on it. And the Conservative candidates, the Conservative platform said they were going to repeal Bill C-18 because of what it's doing to independent media. Peter Menzies did an article. He was the former CRTC VP and said that democracy, he said media will live or die on who gets elected on Monday night. And apparently it's about ready to die.
Yeah, well, nobody, let's be honest, let's be candid. There's no point in beating around the bush. Basically, nobody in position of power in Canada cares about the media, or they only care about it to the extent that they can manipulate it so that it speaks about them in favorable terms. That's certainly the Liberal approach from my sitting in my little ivory tower here. That's what I see. The Conservatives, Pierre Poilievre did start to make a little bit of noise about it, didn't he? In the last sort of week or two of the campaign. But
Yeah.
if you were going to try and claim that he was really bothered about that issue, then I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that. I don't think he really cared. I spent nearly 2 years trying to get an interview with him about it. He didn't care. He didn't respond. Or he responded a couple of times. I spoke to his press officer fella a couple of times, and then it just died because they didn't care. I spoke to the NDP. They didn't care. Nobody cares. That's the truth. No political party in Canada cares about the media unless they can, in some way, bend the media to their side and to their will and to do what they want. And the Conservatives, for all of their, cant, for all of their complaints about the media and all the rest of it, they were pretty terrible to the media in this campaign. They behaved awfully, actually. They behaved in a shocking way. They don't care about the media either. They only wanted to hear from people that were likely to ask them softball questions. So, the thing is, it's almost gone beyond a political question now. This is almost like a moral question. Do the Canadian people actually have the moral system necessary to demand a free press or to care about the existence of one? And I'm no longer convinced that they do, really.
Yeah, Holly Dones of Blacklock did this story too, in saying that if depending on this election too, that we will basically have just a media that is the federal arm of the federal government. And this is where it's going, because media should be picking up this story, because the hypocrisy in this is just crazy on a couple of levels. One, their stand against Meta and the banning of news on Meta, the only G7 nation to be in this predicament. And two, their big Canada Strong only spend with Canada. Again, the local candidates didn't spend any money with us, but they all spent with Facebook. And that included the Conservatives. They spent with Facebook, did not spend with us in local media. They spent with Meta. And this
Yeah, and
supposedly
who's
is the
what's
evil.
Meta? What is Meta? It's a gigantic it's not just a company. It's something more than a company. It's like it's one of the main sort of tools of the American oligarchy. And its CEO is an ally of Donald Trump's and donated $1 million to his inauguration fund. But none of that seems to matter. This is what I mean. The media class and the political class, in other words, the elite of Canada, do not care about this issue. It's not something that they care about. And that includes Pierre Poilievre. He doesn't even care about it. I mean, he barely mentioned it. He doesn't actually care. So you have to ask yourself, like, where do you go from here? If nobody cares, where do you go from here? Is it just me and you, like, shouting into an empty room at this point? It certainly feels like it.
Peeing into the wind and just getting it spray back in your face. But how important is a free and independent press to a real democracy? I guess that's the
It's
question.
impossible to have a democracy without a free media. I think it's as simple as that. If you don't have a free media, you don't have a democracy.
And why should people listen to the Liberals when they scream, buy Canadian, support Canada, when they can't even do it themselves? Because Polyev had promised that he was not going to spend any money on these platforms. In his conservative platform, he said he would spend it with local independent media. This, like, we're going to try to get answers. We're having Kent Mulgate go out, and we want the answers to this question. We want them to say it.
Yeah, well, I mean, how long now? A couple of years we've been asking politicians, and even when they say something that sounds favorable, as a few of the Conservatives did, nothing really happens, does it? They don't really do anything about it because they don't care. And I'm sorry to be such a doomer, but after so many years of working on this story, I mean, even like the experts and some of the noisiest people, like Michael Geist, he doesn't really care at the end of the day. It's just like it's an area of interest for him because he's very interested in that subject. But I didn't really get the impression that he was about to sort of march on Parliament Hill or something because he's so upset about it. It's like ultimately I feel like, as in so many other areas of Canadian society, the complacence is just gigantic and nobody really cares. Then nobody cares. And I think like this CBC, they've disgraced themselves on this story, but they did interview you, and they have done a couple of stories on it, haven't they, here and there? But I
Yeah.
would say overall they're not bothered. And then don't even get bothered to get started with the likes of CTV and all that. They don't care. No, nor does the National Post. Do you think the National Post would
And
care?
and even you mentioned CTV. In a press release, they mentioned they laid off 4,800 employees at CTV and blamed Bill C-18, yet they still don't care.
Yeah, I just think, look, we've seen the election of Mark Carney, and one of the main reasons for the election of Mark Carney, I think anyway, is because of his credentials, literally because of the sort of piece of paper that he could print off that contains his resume. And I feel like Canadians are they're very vulnerable to that, to credentials. I think they're vulnerable to looking at credentials instead of who, like, the person in front of them. And I feel like with this challenge that we face now, it also applies to the media. I feel like if you don't have credentials, if you're not kind of like one of the big boys like CBC, CTV, or whatever, I feel like a lot of Canadians as well, they're not bothered really. They don't care what you have to say, and that sort of explains a lot of the contempt, and it is contempt that's directed towards like True North and these sort of like smaller, somewhat right wing. I mean, True North is right wing, I would say, outlets. They're just looked upon. It's like, where are your credentials? Like, where are your bona fides? And I just feel like I don't know. You have to have been outside of Canada at some point in your life to understand where I'm coming from here. Because in other societies in the world, credentials don't mean a fraction of what they do here. But here it's kind of like, whoa, you went to Harvard University. Like you must be smart. Like that's a laughable idea in a lot of parts of the world, but here that's kind of like that conquers all before it. And I think that's just one of many problems that we have. And obviously we aren't from one of these glorious credentialed outlets. So I feel kind of like us talking about it, it's like a lot of people just not bothered, aren't they? Where's our Harvard University degree?
Um, I do want to mention one more thing because local politicians, including the BC government, including the locally elected BC MLAs, have said this also poses a danger to our community during our wildfires, especially for us. And they've screamed about it, yet nobody seems to care about the safety of our community either with Bill C-18. They just think that, if you look at the consequences of their action, you have to ask yourself, is it intended to silence most media outlets and just have, the CBC left and the ones they selectively choose to fund?
Well, that's, a couple of people have suggested that. Michael Geist thought that that was ridiculous, and he rejected that when I put it to him. But Holly Dawn, when you spoke to her, she did kind of endorse that idea, didn't she? But I
Yeah.
mean, you look on the New York Times did a story about this a few days ago. That most credentialed of all of the world's newspapers, they did a story about C18 or about news being banned on Facebook in Canada, and obviously because it's the New York Times, they made it all about how right-wing misinformation now dominates on Facebook, and in a way, obviously in the New York Times is very narrow, deluded worldview. Somehow it's the left that suffers from this, but I mean, people who actually know about this story are aware that it's not even a left or right thing. It's like a status quo and change. Those are the two sides. And what this does, this ban on news and destruction of the media in Canada, it strengthens the status quo. That's it really, and that's why they love CBC so much, the Liberals, because the CBC is the ultimate status quo institution.
Yeah. And Meta not suffering from the ban in Canada. They reported strong first quarter results for 2025. Revenues rising 16% year over year at $42.3 billion in net income, jumping by 35% to $16.7 billion. And they can thank our Liberal government and the Conservatives for piling money into this American company when supposedly Canada's strong, support Canada, support local, support. All that is just nonsensical talk when the actions speak louder than words. And here's all this money poured into Facebook.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine what 5 million, it's more than five, isn't it? 5.5 million or something like that. Can you imagine what that would have done if it was spread around
Yeah.
independent media outlets? I mean, that would have actually made a bit of a difference to the to the strength and the resilience of the independent media in Canada. And that's not even that's like chump change, isn't it? In the real
It,
world, it's not that
it's
much
just,
money, but it would have made a huge difference.
it's hard to believe these people, when it's so blatant, right? When they're asking you to do something, when, as you said early on, rules for thee, not me. There you go.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. Why didn't they do that? Why didn't they give it to independent media when that would have been the right thing to do? That would have also been consistent with their argument that they were resisting the United States. It would have made perfect sense in a philosophy undergraduate class or something like that, or a student union debate or something like that. It would have been, it would have all added up. It would have made sense. Why did they not do it? Because power was on the line. It was about power. And the Liberal Party had to ask themselves, do you want to follow your principles or do you want power? And they chose power, obviously, like all unscrupulous politicians do.
Yeah, let's move on though, because you and I could spend all day there and just like banging our heads against the wall, and the hypocrisy is so blatant that sometimes I question my own sanity when we talk about Bill C-18. Trump says Carney's coming to the White House very shortly, and he insisted that Pierre Poilievre hated him much more. So that meeting will take place within a week or so, the president said. There you go.
And he called him a very nice gentleman, I think. Said that he had a lovely call with him. But yeah, I mean, look, Donald Trump, that post on election day, to me, that confirmed my long-held suspicions that he really did want Mark Carney and the Liberals to win, because he might not have known initially, but he certainly 100% he knew by that point that every time he made a noise about the 51st state and all the rest of it, the Liberal polls went up, and he chose to keep on doing it. Obviously, he wanted the Liberals to win. Why
Right.
that is the question we have to ask and find an answer to. Just like we also have to answer the question, why did the Politburo of the Chinese Communist Party want the Liberal Party to win this election? Why is that? Why did they make efforts to bring that about? What is the reason? Like that, in so many ways, and for so many reasons, that should be the number one story in Canada right now. But of course, it is not.
And this is a Holly Dome Blacklock story. The seeks oversight of the CBC. CBC News, for the second time in about 6 weeks, faces demands that it submit to the same independent scrutiny that all other television and radio stations have to submit to, because it is the only broadcaster in Canada permitted to deal with audience complaints in-house. Imagine that, eh?
Well, yeah, and imagine as well how they deal with those complaints. Usually with not, I was going to say a slap on the wrist, but not even a slap on the wrist, is it really? It's just like that again. I mean, I don't just want to rant this whole time, but like talking about principles again, the CBC just embody the lack of principles in the Canadian elite. Like when Rosemary Barton made an absolutely astonishing, reprehensible mistake, if you want to call it that. She said something very inflammatory, an absolutely insane thing to say live on air to, God knows how many people. And what was CBC's response to that? To add on a sentence at the end of a story on the website. That's not adequate. That is not adequate at all. And if we'd made a mistake like that and it was actually had an effect, it was actually a significant event, I think the CBC would probably be leading the charge and saying, Now Media issued or like wrote one sentence on a website to correct this, but that was it. And people would be outraged. They would be outraged. But obviously, when they do it, it's different, isn't it? Because they are the all-knowing, wizards of the world, and they get to decide what's right and wrong.
They are the purveyors of truth, or their version of the truth.
Yep, and it's been this way forever. I feel a lot more at ease with this kind of thing than some other people do, because I've obsessively read history like all of my sort of adolescent and adult life, going back quite a long time now. And it's been the same since the, Sumerian Empire and, the Roman Empire, every single period of history, all the Chinese empires, I mean, especially the Chinese empires, actually, they've just they've basically done something which might have been considered immoral and then just justified it and said, we decide what's right and wrong, and then promulgate that new reality, and everybody else just has to suck it up and deal with it. It's basically a human characteristic, I would say. And we're no different, even though we think we're so different, don't we, from Bronze Age Near East or whatever. But we aren't. We're just as fallible. We're just the same.
This is a tweet from Holly Doan, and then a story too. The economy falls into what the Chamber calls the worst case forecast. In the last economic statement, claimed Canada would be a leader in the G7, but the economy took a dive. So Canada's economy has fallen to what the Canadian Chamber of Commerce yesterday called the worst case forecast. And its claim in its economic summit had claimed the nation would be a leader in the G7. There you go.
I'd say if whoever the economic advisor has been in Canada for the last few years is gonna really have to explain himself. Do you know who that was?
I
Because I've
do.
forgotten.
I do remember the guy's name. Mark Carney, I believe it was the Canada's economic advisor.
Well, what's this, Mark? What's going on? I thought you were an economic genius.
Yeah, and then also, while he was the Canada's economic advisor, he was there when they decided that they were going to increase the capital gains inclusion tax because they needed to generate more revenue to balance the budget. While at the same time, he was also acting in the interest as an executive interest of Brookfield. And decided to dodge taxes in the amount of $5 billion. And why that's not one of the big stories in Canada just blows me away as well.
Yeah, but he's explained, hasn't he, that that was actually a patriotic act because there were a lot of they were Canadian investments, weren't they? So dodging taxes in Canada benefited some Canadians. Therefore, elbows up.
Elbows up, all right. Yeah, there you go. And you talk about CBC shamelessly cheering on Mark Carney. They said, National Post did a story here saying that Rosie Barton and the crew were shamelessly cheering on Mark Carney. And I watched some of that too, and it made me feel very uneasy.
Why do you reckon that is, Jim? I mean, I don't understand this. Could it possibly have been something to do with their livelihoods and their pensions and their incomes being reliant on a Liberal win? I don't know about these things. Maybe you do.
Yeah, no, and plus, yeah, no, yeah, ugh. The CBC needs to, I'm not saying they don't deserve to be funded as a public broadcaster, but they need to be outside the arm of the Liberal government. They need to be funded and responsible to the taxpayers of Canada because they do not represent the voice of Canada. Like 3 in 5 voters did not vote for the Liberal Party. And yet, who does CBC act for?
Indeed. But they like to passionately defend themselves from time to time, don't they? And claim that, just look at that question I asked. Look at the question I asked that Liberal minister the other day. He didn't like that, did he?
No.
That's evidence, apparently. But I mean, of course, just on any given day, look at what CBC talks about. It's quite obvious, isn't it? Whether is this actually is this a real debate issue though? Is this actually a point of dispute with anybody serious in this country? I'm not sure it is. Like this question, is it an open question? Like, is CBC biased, guys? Like, who is actually asking that question? Of course they're biased. It's the most obvious thing in the world. I mean, just go on their website, listen to it, just sit down for 5 hours and watch CBC. And then tell me jot down what you hear and what you see. Every single item on the agenda is pretty much left liberal agitation. That's what it is.
Yeah. If I had the ability to control their funding, I would say if you don't want to represent the 3 in 5 voters in Canada, then don't take 3/5 of the money that you think you deserve, because you're not representing the voice of Canada. You're representing Liberal interests.
Yeah, and not even just with obviously in this election, I think it was a bit more obvious that it was the Liberal Party that they were kind of keen on, but it's not even just that. It's more like liberal ideas.
That's what I'm saying, Liberal
just
interests.
In general. Yeah, various liberal obsessions. Like obviously the CBC has been obsessively reporting on climate change and green activism and all that kind of thing, and also various Indigenous issues that are like a bit on the fringe almost, even within Indigenous communities. And LGBT stuff. They pushed certain things because that's what they're interested in. They obviously have their priorities. They're not going around doing sympathetic articles about, conservative Christians, are they? They would never do that.
Yeah, one of the comments from Ian Leslie that they have decided themselves, Chantal has decided that that CBC is unbiased. So there you go. So they've decided themselves they are not biased.
Wow, that's convenient, isn't it? That's lucky that was so close to home that they could find the source.
There you go. Doug Ford, we got a little clip here to play from your premiere.
Ask about federal issues. You're here making a tough on crime announcement. I didn't hear much of that from the Liberal platform, but there was a lot of that in the federal Conservative platform. Why didn't you come out with Pierre Poilievre and make these kinds of statements during the campaign?
I shouldn't interfere in the federal election. Last time I checked, Pierre Poilievre never came out in our election. Matter of fact, him or one of his lieutenants told every one of his members, don't you dare go out and help the PCs. Isn't that ironic? But anyways, I'm not going to dig deep into this. The people spoke, and I have no say in who people vote for. But I'll tell you one thing. We have a government, democratically elected. I will hold them accountable. I'll hold them accountable like I would no matter if it's a conservative government or a liberal government. My interest is protecting the people of Ontario. And I will be all over this government. They know I will be, as I was before, about being tough on crime.
Premier, you've said before you're born with a C stamped on your forehead. You talked about having a blue sign on your lawn.
Yep.
Why is there so much bad blood between you and the federal party? And how does the federal party start to build bridges now within the conservative movement as they look to the next 2, 3, 4 years?
Well, all they have to do is make a phone call. I like a lot of the MPs, but the people spoke, and they spoke loud and clear. They spoke loud and clear in our election, and they spoke loud and clear on the federal election. And so that's democracy. They elect who they want.
There you go.
He's got such an interesting way of speaking, hasn't he? It's like, I'm always going to talk like this because this is how I end my sentences. It's like, where are you going with this, Dougie? But yeah, that's almost word for word what the Conservative Premier of Nova Scotia said as well. And he just said, pick up the phone. Like he said, just reach out. So like the Poilievre team, you know, they've kind of, I think in retrospect, and certainly people were saying it at the time as well, but in retrospect, it's going to have to be acknowledged that they kind of screwed up there.
So I would even say even British Columbia. The reason we have an NDP government again, even after everybody said that the NDP have done so many bad things here in British Columbia, is because the leaders of these conservative parties can't figure out how to kind of like build bridges. Like John Rustad, like Kevin Falcon, when he folded the BC United Party, handed him the football at the 1 yard line and said, here, get it over the line. And Rustad threw the ball down on the ground and said, I don't need it. And then he refused to talk to the other candidates, for a couple of weeks, left them hanging. And it turned out to be that what actually ended up losing him the race. And it sounds like the same thing going on here. Wouldn't pick up the phone with Ford, wouldn't pick up the phone with the other premier. And that's what we got.
But also, Poilievre didn't lift a finger to help Rustad either, did he?
No.
So, and that's not being mentioned in this story, but
I think
a lot of this is being blamed on Jenny Byrne, who's like Poilievre's sort of the mastermind behind the curtain for Poilievre. Apparently, and that's what the thing with Nova Scotia apparently was about, that she was extraordinarily rude and dismissive of Nova Scotia.
I've got some advice for the Conservatives. Pay Katie Telford twice what they're paying her. If you want to win an election, because like, holy cow, that liberal marketing machine is definitely, look what they did. They took a party that was basically on the brink of disaster and they put a fresh coat of paint on it and then found themselves their trump card. And we talked about this story yesterday, and built fear into it and used fear again to win an election, just like they did in COVID. They used fear to win that election. And fear seems to be their number one weapon. And then their mouthpiece for that is the CBC.
Yeah. Well, I think more broadly speaking, I think the federal Conservative Party has been just pretty bad at politics for a long time, probably since,
I think,
you'd have to go back to like Stephen Harper to find the Conservatives actually being able to do politics and win. I mean, what were they thinking with Andrew Scheer and Erin O'Toole? They were such low grade leaders. They never should have been the leaders of that party. And the campaigns that they ran, like the Scheer campaign, was sheer garbage, wasn't it? It was absolutely dreadful. I mean, Poilievre obviously was another. If Poilievre had been in the place of Scheer or O'Toole, then I think he would have won either of those elections, 2019 or 2021. But I mean, obviously, this is a weird election, this one. It's hard to put it down to any particular thing, but they've clearly mismanaged things behind the scenes, haven't they? At least when it comes to speaking to people like Doug Ford, who, say what you want about Doug Ford, he is very, very successful and very good at politics.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, and we got to know Pierre, we did interviews with Pierre in their early days, and I think he walked away from his own true values, I think, and allowed other people to tell him what to do. I mean, that's just my opinion. And he changed a little bit, right? Like he became more guarded and he kept repeating the same taglines. and he was less genuine at the end there.
He physically changed as well, which I think that might sound like a superficial thing to remark upon, but that kind of symbolizes the rest of the change. He decided to get contacts or the laser eye surgery or whatever, and started like getting buffed up and walking around in t-shirts, and it's like that's not the guy that we interviewed a number of times, and the guy that most people sort of thought he was like this chirpy, energetic little nerd who kind of walked around in his shirt and tie with his glasses on and was like talking about house prices and things. It's like, and freedom. But he obviously, he got the consultants in, I guess. Maybe he got McKinsey in, and they decided that they were going to make the campaign very different, and it wasn't going to be that kind of upstart campaign. But I feel like his approach to the media, this has been remarked upon loads of times, but his approach to the media was really, really unwise. I mean, I can tell him that as somebody who's worked in the media. His media approach was stupid. It was really stupid. And he could have learned so much from Donald Trump, who literally had just won. He could have learned from that you go around and you sort of spread your personality around. You go on the podcast, you energize younger people, particularly younger people who were going out for him. They were going to vote for him, but he didn't kind of energize them enough because he didn't speak to them. He just did the rallies over and over again. It's like didn't work.
It blows me away that he didn't do the Joe Rogan podcast, because then maybe Joe Rogan would have had Mark Carney on there too, because there's no way Mark Carney could have lasted with Joe Rogan. And there you go. And speaking of the United States, though, lots of people think that Americans are really keen on Canada and all this stuff. And I watched the interview with the 100 Days. ABC News got to do an interview with Donald Trump. And in that interview, they asked about Canada. And they said, well, Canada just elected a new premier. What do you think of that? So that just shows you, that line right there shows you how much they care about Canadian politics.
Well, you mean because of the word premier?
Yeah, they didn't say prime minister. They said premier, right? They have no idea.
That is a word. That is a word that's... Premier means like leader of a country. So, for example, talking about France or something like that, you talk about Macron as the French premier. But obviously that word in the Canadian context, it's not really possible to use it, is it? Because of the name of the leaders of provinces. Yeah.
Well, there you go. And this one's a scary thought. Elizabeth May, the only Green seat, is offering herself up as the speaker. Wouldn't that be great to listen to her?
You gotta laugh, haven't you? You actually must laugh.
Hey, she said actually that Canadians need to pay more taxes so that Canada can fill the space that the Americans have vacated in U.S. aid. I think Canada might.
But also that would mean that the Greens didn't have a single MP in Parliament.
Yeah, I think Canada may need to apply for some of that aid.
Yeah, Kelowna should have sent off an application. Get that in, Tom Dias.
Yeah, I mean, I had some discussions last night. I went to an event last night, and I talked to, like a few businesses, and I talked to like dealerships, and the numbers are way off, like way, way off, like really bad, like really bad. Like the economy is really bad, and but obviously it's just the vibe. So,
well, business confidence is right at the bottom, isn't it? But I suppose you can say that's a vibe if you want to, but I don't think that's a very sensible way to approach something like that.
Unemployment is about to go up in Canada as well. The other co-leader of the Green Party, remember they had co-leaders? They couldn't even pick a leader. They had a co-leader. The co-leader has said after polling fifth in a 5-candidate contest, he's like, okay, I am going to pack it in. There you go.
Yeah, and he'll be back off. It says here that he used to work for Amnesty International. He'll be back off to do that, won't he? And the charity NGO industrial complex, where they all somehow seem to make an absolute fortune while not doing very much. So good for him.
If Elizabeth May is in the seat as the Speaker of the House, I'm sure she'll be campaigning steadily to make sure he makes enough money to fill out his great lifestyle that he needs. There you go.
Make enough money so that he can be comfortable enough and have enough free time to go around waving flags and shouting at people in the street and campaigning in various ways.
There you go. The Supreme Court denies leave for appeal in Ontario versus Mathar, meaning decision of the Court of Appeal stands, case remitted. There you go. About climate change, right? Saying climate change is against the charter.
Well, these kids who obviously didn't do this by themselves, and I'm not saying that I don't actually know that, but I'm gonna basically declare that that's almost certainly true, that they were coached into this by cynical older people. They went and sued Ontario and said, based on changes that were made in 2018, I think, by Doug Ford's government, they sued and said, look, what you've done here will result in more carbon emissions being put out into the atmosphere, and that violates my charter rights, my right to life, because I'm a young person and I'm going to have to deal with that. And it went through all kinds of, the usual sort of hearings, and then the Ontario government tried to get it to the Supreme Court because they just wanted to get rid of it, I guess. And the Supreme Court said, nah. So now it's going to have to be figured out in Ontario. But it is it's a very odd case. It's so odd that, if you added up how much money has been spent on this already, almost certainly it'll be millions of dollars on this absolute nonsense. I mean, to go to court and say it violates my constitutional rights that Ontario has an industry of some sort. I mean, it's just, why was that not thrown out right away? I have no idea, but there you go. On it goes.
On it goes. Spain in that blackout. Somebody had mentioned it in a comment earlier that we need to talk about this, and here we are talking about it. That big blackout. And most of that blackout was due to just like an oversupply of solar power, and it kind of like crashed the grid, and then they just didn't have stable power.
But yeah, although that's still controversial because the people in charge of the grid and the ministers and all that in Spain, they're refusing to say that. They're being a little bit coy about it. But this is from other people with this Financial Times story. It's people that have worked in that grid system and who know it well, like experts, real actual experts for once. And they've come out and said it's because 55% of all the power at that time was coming from solar, and they did not have the reserves. They didn't have the reliable energy reserves, it doesn't have to be fossil fuels. It could be like hydro or something like that.
Base load, could be nuclear, could be anything, right? That base load power, yeah.
But they just didn't have that ready and available, so these experts claim. And as a consequence, when this outage was triggered, the whole thing just went into meltdown, and it was a whole day before they could fix it and get it back on.
Yeah, so I think
it is a story of, don't be too bullish on renewables. Like, you've got to have your house in order if you're gonna go all in on solar or something like that.
I would advise people to go and get an understanding of how electricity works versus gasoline. Like when you're moving gasoline from like Edmonton to Kelowna, that actual molecule of gasoline travels from Edmonton to Kelowna, whereas electrons are kind of like there right away. Like the electrons charge the line, like they move at the speed of light. So it's not like, when the power comes from Site C Dam, it's about keeping the power grid stable. Otherwise, you either get blackouts or brownouts or there's outages, right? If the grid crashes.
Yeah, and I mean, this was a deadly outage as well. People died. Several people actually died, and I suppose it'll be probably years before they figure out everything bad that happened, because it's a whole country for a day. But it was pretty scary, and they do have nuclear power plants there, and I think they went into like shutdown mode or something. They had to. I mean, it's all pretty terrifying actually when you look at the details.
Right. Well, there you go. And Polyev making calls to former Tories, to fellow Tories, but not under pressure to step down, according to a report. Although, some of the CBC reports are saying that they know, Rosemary Barton said she knows people that are pressuring him to step down.
Well, there's been a couple that have been on CBC. The only Conservatives that ever go on CBC are the ones that don't like the Conservative Party or don't like Polyev anyway. And they've been on and they've been complaining and talking about a leadership review and stuff like that, but they're not like big names. They're pretty sort of small figures. I think in general, Poilievre's position is stable, and he's looked upon with a
I
lot
just,
of fondness in the Tory party.
I
And
just,
just compare him to the last two leaders before him. I mean, obviously he's a cut above those two, isn't he? So
and I just don't think there's anybody in the wings. Just like in the Liberals, there was nobody in their wings. That's why they brought in an import. Like who would replace him? The only other two strong Conservatives that have a shot at it, I would say, is your friend Doug Ford and Danielle Smith. And I don't think Danielle Smith is ready to leave Alberta at this point. And Doug Ford, you never know, maybe that is one of his plans.
I also kind of like if you're honest and you look at it in the cold light of day, I don't think there's any chance that Danielle Smith would ever win a federal election. I don't think she has the brand. I don't think she has the policies. I think people would really turn against her and think that she was some kind of Alberta chauvinist or something like that. And you have to win a certain amount of seats in the East, obviously,
Yeah,
don't you? And
I
she
just don't.
wouldn't.
I don't think she has the interest anyway. But I'm just saying again.
Yeah, she doesn't want to. Well, clearly she doesn't want to, because if she did want to, she would govern a bit more like Doug Ford, like Captain Canada sort of thing. Whereas I think Doug Ford really does want to be prime minister, and I think he really could be as well. I think he might be. But he's getting on. He hasn't got that many years left. I don't think, not of his life necessarily, but in the sort of front line of politics. So I don't know. Maybe he's going to wait and see what happens to Poilievre. If Poilievre gets pushed out, then I reckon Dougie would go in for it.
Yeah, our friend has showed up there saying that Meta steals news. Meta doesn't not steal any news. So, not that he's just there to keyboard warrior kind of guy, but that's absolutely wrong. By the way, Ukraine and U.S. signed that minerals deal that they've been waiting for months after haggling over it.
Yeah, it's a little bit. It's not gone down well. Talking about principles and all that, it's not very principled, but it is very American. This is very much the sort of thing that FDR would have done. This is what the Americans did to the British while the British were about to be driven to extinction by the Nazis. They extorted the British in exchange for material of various kinds, weapons and whatnot. And the Americans are just living up to that old way of doing business. We'll help you, but you're gonna have to pay for it, and we don't really care if you're gonna all die.
Crime in rural Canada, 34% higher than in cities. Residents finding the new reality scary.
Yeah, it's based on a Statistics Canada report, which is itself based on the crime report from, I think that came out a couple of months ago or something, didn't it? But it finds that per capita, yeah, Saskatchewan is the crime capital of Canada, and also that rural areas are a third more likely to experience crime than urban areas, which is shocking, really, isn't it? You think that you're going to find tranquility out there in the country, but apparently not.
Yeah, no, it's scary for sure. A new tax targeting empty homes in Canmore. This is put forward by the city of Canmore there, and there's been some pushback on it, saying that the city has outstepped its authority, and there's some challenges there with the court. This is similar.
But don't
to
worry, because the mayor says this is not an attack on second homeowners.
Yeah.
So
this is similar to the speculation tax in British Columbia.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. So Canmore is obviously a vacation mecca. It's not really a place where people go other than because it's a great place. It's a beautiful place, actually, but mostly for vacationers.
Yeah, it's kind of odd, isn't it? Like what exactly are they hoping for here? Because it's not exactly like a self-sustaining town, is it? It does completely rely on people that have second homes and tourists and whatnot.
Yep. And then Lillooet's ER problems continue. This time it's shut down for a period of 3 days. This is just an ongoing saga with Lillooet, eh?
Yeah, and I mean, they're told to go to Kamloops, aren't they? About a 2-hour drive. If all's well, it's a couple of hours. It's kind of, I mean, how many? What I would like to know, and Interior Health certainly will not reveal this information, but I mean, I would like to know how many people have actually been forced to make that journey. Because that's a tough journey, isn't it? When you need emergency health care, you know?
It is, and it's an ongoing thing. We reached out to Lillooet and talked to the mayor, and they didn't want to make a lot of noise. So I'm sure that, you know, like funding is an issue as well. So we're going to follow up on it because it's Lillooet, it's Merritt, it's Oliver, it's 100 Mile House. Many of the smaller communities in British Columbia suffering from the same fate of lack of ER doctors and nurses. Let's move on to markets. The stock market, like we were saying yesterday, that it looks like it's basing. There's some good news out of many of the big stocks. Microsoft surprising, beating expectations. Meta beating expectations. So it, you know, you can see probably that we based and that we're probably going to be moving higher from here in the stock market, I would guess. Especially those earnings that are beating expectations are going to buoy well for the NASDAQ or the Magnificent Seven. I know you look at it, but that's what it is. And then gold. Gold obviously hit that $3,500 mark and then it's backed off, filling that gap when it gapped up. But with the stock market starting to take off, money will flow out of gold and move back into the market. That's just the way it goes. Crypto, you and I have talked about this for a little while here, and says that it's likely going to challenge its $100,000 mark. And look at that, it's knocking on the door of 100,000. Any thoughts?
It's kind of crazy though, isn't it? Look at the ups and downs. No wonder people love it so much. You can make so much money in such a short period of time, can't you? But you can also lose so much money.
But I think one of the things, if you watch this show on a regular basis, and we're trying to help people understand technical moves, and if you look at it, you can see, we talked about it when it was basing in there, right? That if it held that mark, it had to fill that gap there from the election, because if you go back to November, that's the election gap up, right? That's because, you know, like the Trump administration, very favorable to crypto, Bitcoin especially. And it gapped, and then it kind of like chopped there, and then it fell off, and then it stayed in that support line, and you can draw a support line there. And then from the support line, it looks like it wants to go back and challenge that old high. So the high that it's going to have a tough time breaking is if you look at those two tops back there in the early part of 2025, the just over 100,000, that's where it's going to meet some resistance again. And if it breaks through that, then it could go a lot higher. That's just the way technicals work. And then if we move
Psychology.
if we move on to the Canadian dollar, again, the up on the Canadian dollar is not so much a reflection of the Canadian economy, but just on US dollar weakness across all the currencies. That may change shortly if they ink some trade deals here, which supposedly they're doing. That Canadian US dollar will strengthen, and then the Canadian dollar will then start reacting to its own merits as opposed to US dollar weakness. There you go. In our tech section here, AI, Meta AI gets its own app. There's Mark Zuckerberg there, you know. It's got an app that lets you talk to Meta using voice or text. You can ask questions, get help with tasks, or just have a conversation. There's so many now AI brands out there. There's ChatGPT. There's Grok. Grok 3.5 is supposedly going to launch here right away. Now Meta has one, which is basically, they were kind of like Llama as one of their things too. And Google is like way far behind. And one that you would expect to be out in front is Apple. Apple Siri or Apple Intelligence. I think they should change the name.
Yeah, and Amazon as well. Amazon's probably the worst of all of
Yeah,
them.
Apple,
I know,
Alexa.
like maybe you don't instinctively think of them as being a tech company, but they really are, and they're increasingly trying to get involved, aren't they? But they're AI. Well, they don't have AI, do they? It's just dumb as
Alexa,
anything.
Alexa and Siri, they would be the dumb kids in the classroom for sure. Like they might be held back. Uh, ChatGPT retires the 4 model, and as they're introducing their 4.1 model here, and there you go.
Wow. Yeah, Sam Altman was saying that he was going to preserve it for history or something like that, wasn't he?
So April has seen significant advancements in AI, with developments spanning finance, journalism, sports broadcasting, personal productivity, and highlighting technology's expanding influence. So a lot of those sectors are all really being influenced by AI right now. In our automotive section, automotive and EV, and we said this, we've been saying this over and over and over and over and over again. If Canada doesn't drop the EV mandates here in Canada, like the Americans have dropped, there will not be an automotive sector in Canada to defend. Here's Stellantis, says it's going to move some auto production, to the US to avoid tariffs. They should add to it to avoid EV mandates.
Yeah, it's the push and pull, isn't it? And they're stuck there in the middle of that. They're being enticed into the US,
Because if
and
you
then
look at
they're
it,
almost being forced out of Canada, aren't they, at the same time?
I watched a piece there on YouTube today, and it talked about like the top 10 manufacturers of EVs, and it's Tesla, and then followed by 9 Chinese companies. It's not Ford. It's not. You know what I mean? It's not. It's if they allowed Chinese EVs into Canada or the United States, it would decimate the legacy automakers. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. I mean, there's that. It's a tricky one, that, though, isn't it? Because those Chinese EV companies, like lots of other Chinese companies, they're in an artificial position anyway. They shouldn't be sold at the price they're sold at. They shouldn't have if all was fair and equal in global trade, that they wouldn't be competitors, would they? So it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because it's kind of like you do want to punish that behavior, or at least prevent that from succeeding, that kind of behavior. But then at the same time, we're
Yeah.
talking about something that's supposedly going to save the planet, and it would also help the consumer to have cheaper EVs, wouldn't it? But
But
yeah, it doesn't work like that, I guess.
in Canada, hybrids are a big deal. Like people love hybrids. Like I was talking to that dealer, they can't get enough hybrids, and that's what these automakers do well. They do hybrids and they do gasoline cars very well. And if there's an EV mandate here in Canada and they get punished for every vehicle they make that's not an EV, why would they stay?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it seems to me that it's not a question of will this be removed. It's about when and what the circumstances are going to be surrounding its removal, because it'll become increasingly obvious that it's not feasible.
So another hit piece on Elon Musk. The Wall Street Journal put out a piece claiming that the Tesla board had contacted recruitment firms to initiate a CEO search for the company. And Tesla is responding by saying that's absolutely false. And then Elon Musk responded as well, saying extremely bad breach of ethics that Wall Street Journal would publish a deliberately false article and fail to include an unequivocal denial beforehand by the Tesla board of directors. Imagine that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they would have got it from somewhere. I don't think they'll have just fabricated it entirely. I don't think the Wall Street Journal are that, goblin-like. But obviously they've got the wrong end of the stick, haven't they, by the sounds of it?
Well, to be fair, they should have included Tesla's comment regardless, no?
Yeah, well, I mean, I must confess I don't know the details of this story, so I don't know what they've done. But the thing is, Elon Musk is he's found himself in a position now maybe where he's the boy that cried wolf, because I don't think many people take him seriously anymore. So, or at least not many people like in the middle that aren't already on his team. So I feel like he's kind of in a way wasting his breath, isn't he? It's quite similar to the Trump approach, where people in the middle just no longer listen to what he says, really, because he's been guilty of hyperbole and ridiculousness on so many occasions.
Ford terminated its FNV4 project that was aimed at rivaling Tesla. They said terminated that ambitious project aimed at creating a next-generation electrical architecture to rival Tesla's software capabilities, soaring costs and ongoing delays. I still believe that Ford is going to deal with Tesla and license their software. That's my
I mean, that is
thoughts.
such an indictment of Ford, that, isn't it? Like, how is it that Tesla could do this, going back to the days when they were penniless? They managed to create this software, but Ford, which is like, the world's probably has the highest reputation of all
Yeah.
automakers in the world, they couldn't figure it out with all their assets.
Yeah. And the BC government announced a pause on the Clean BC Go Electric rebate program, which provided consumers financial incentives. That's likely due because there's no money.
Well, yeah, and I guess, I mean, again, this is an indication that possibly, just maybe I'm a cynic, I don't know, but possibly the NDP doesn't actually really believe what it says about the impending end of the world if emissions go up in British Columbia. Maybe, maybe they don't believe that after all.
And then we talked about it a while ago about that failure of Lion Electric in Quebec. It's unlikely to survive. Like nobody's going to pick it up. Quebec government turned down an opportunity to put money in to keep it alive. So that looks like that electric bus maker and truck maker may see its end.
Sure, a few people managed to feather their nests from that failure, though.
And we're on to our memes, and this is the best part. And our friend Ruby Dalla is back. The memester, the Canadian Elon Musk of memes. Ruby Dalla is back. The queen of the meme. There you go. She's got, we're still scratching heads wondering how we did elect a Trudeau 2.0. The only thing missing from the picture is the piggy bank that she's still going on grinding about that 350,000 that they took from her. There you go.
Yeah. Well, when I was looking at when I did that story on Facebook, when I looked at Mark Carney's personal account, he actually spent a couple of $100,000 of his own money because it explains where the money came from. Most of it, the vast majority of it came from the Liberal Party, but he also put some money in. And I can only imagine it's from that kind of war chest that he built up in that period, when he was running to be the leader of the Liberals. So that might have been Ruby's coin right there.
Ruby's like looking for her money back.
That's Mark Zuckerberg, Ruby.
And then Conservative MP is trying to battle Ruby Dalla for one of the king of the memes, as he put out this Doug Ford meme.
This was actually mentioned as well in a few news stories. It's really funny when they try and in a like really serious news story where they're taking themselves seriously, like a CBC political story or something, and they have to describe a meme. But yeah, I mean, it's just open warfare now, isn't it, between the federal Conservatives and the progressives there in Ontario.
Doug, look, in this picture, looks like he's pumping a little iron along with Pierre, but I don't know if that's the case.
He does look a little bit like Hulk Hogan, doesn't he? I can see the similarities.
And then this one's for you. Doctors confirm life after age 35 is just an endless cycle of dieting and back pain until you die.
I love that stock image there. That's a classic stock image, isn't it? A bad back stock. But they also say, don't they, like, I think it's about 35 or 40 maybe, that after that you perceive the passage of time as being a lot more rapid. So like, even though you still have whatever, like 40 years left or something like that, it actually, you're going to perceive it more like 20 or 30 or something because time just flies. When you're not rubbing your back, that is.
And then you mentioned this earlier, so we've got the image for you. We only have 12 seconds left. What's that?
I mean, to be honest, like, how good of a job did the extremists within the climate debate climate change debate, how good of a job did they actually do? You were praising Katie Telford earlier. I mean, Katie Telford is as nothing compared to these people because they've actually persuaded many, possibly millions, maybe even billions of people that the world is actually going to end. That's what the 1.5 Celsius increase by 2100, that's what that represents. That represents, life or death kind of thing. Whereas you spend a couple of hours reading the IPCC reports, like the serious people, not the maniacs like Greta Thunberg, but the real serious people, and they said nothing of the kind, nothing at all. There is no evidence whatsoever anywhere that the world is going to end because of climate change and CO2 emissions. So, I mean, whoever it was that wanted to do this, don't know if it was just Al Gore or something, but you've got to credit them. Like they have done an astonishingly good job, haven't they, and getting their viewpoint into the mainstream.
Yep. And then one of the comments is there that they got to have credit Elon Musk for saving free speech by saving X. And I believe that if the Liberal government gets to pass its Online Harms Act here, one of their targets, I believe, will be X. So if you believe in freedom of speech, maybe reach out to your MP and see if they can get rid of Bill C-18. And I would suggest not allowing them to pass the Online Harms Act. Well, either way, we'll be like in the UK where they knock on your door because we put up a meme like this one here.
We're climate deniers. I mean, Tony Blair, we didn't talk about that, did we? But even Tony Blair, he's like the prince of the liberal left. He's like the Merlin of the liberal left, I would say, next to Bill Clinton or somebody like that. He said the other day, pretty much what I just said, but in sort of Tony Blair speak. And he said this is just completely like ridiculous and delusional and impractical, and we need to start. We need to return to reality on the subject of climate change. So I mean, if even Tony Blair has left the church, I think it's probably time for a lot of other people to reconsider their position.
Yeah, I heard Donald Trump, they must have been causing guys like Mark Carney to lose their mind yesterday because Donald Trump was speaking and promoting the burning of coal in the United States.
Well, enough coal gets burned everywhere else in the world, doesn't it?
And he called it, he said, I'm not going to call it coal, I'm going to call it clean coal. You know how Donald Trump is. He definitely is.
No, he doesn't even call it that, does he? He calls it beautiful, clean coal. That's what he says.
Anyway.
But to be honest, look, it's a question of what are you going to do? Are you going to destroy your own coal industry and then watch China and India go all in, as well as other countries in the world, and then possibly surpass you in technology and industrial capacity and all the rest of it? I mean, maybe you could do that if you were, if you were not bothered about geopolitical outcomes. You're not bothered about America potentially just being like annexed by China.
So you know how the media, the mainstream media, likes to only have so-called experts that that are on one side of the argument. An argument that I would love to watch is the new Prime Minister Mark Carney debating President Trump on climate change.
Yeah, I'd like to see them debate anything. I'd like to see them debate where to get dinner. That would be a good one.
Anyway, according to Al Gore and I think what's his name, John Kerry, the world has already ended.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see some humility from those people because there's never been any evidence, any serious evidence to suggest what they said in the first place was accurate. But there's now an abundance of evidence that contradicts their position. And it's from the absolute gold standard climate scientists. Like I say all the time in the IPCC, read those reports. Completely contradicts the sort of bollocks that Al Gore has spent his life putting out there, his misinformation. I would love to see him at some point apologize for that and say, all right, maybe I was wrong, fellas, and I've set off this kind of terrible social contagion, this like moral panic among simple-minded people like Greta Thunberg and all the rest of them who haven't been able to deal with the information, and they've acted out and they've had kind of these public religious meltdowns.
No. Well, that's the end of our show for today. We have one more show coming up, and then we're going to make a decision. I'm going to be off in San Francisco for the following week. Going to the United States. Apparently, I'm not supposed to go there. According to the liberals, you're not supposed to go to the United States, and you're not supposed to spend money on American companies, yet they do. They spent, back to our lead story, they spent $5.4 million with Facebook. Well, they banned outlets like ourselves from utilizing Facebook. So there.
I mean, I would say there's not much chance that you're going to go down there and spend even a fraction of what the Liberal Party has spent on in America. So you can go down there and you can get your In-N-Out burger with pride.
You know what? Some of the best burgers ever, In-N-Out Burger. That would be a great franchise to have here. One of my things, if I was sitting there with my last meal and somebody asked me, what I would want, and In-N-Out Burger would make the list, or a burger for sure.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to disagree with that. Or just the experience as well, just sitting in there on the diner chairs, the nice red chairs.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely one of the great things about In-N-Out Burger is that they're very good at one thing, and I would liken them to Tesla. Tesla is really good at making. I mean, it's some of the best cars in the world. I'm a big fan of Tesla and the work that Elon Musk does. And so you go ahead and start hating me for that. But In-N-Out Burger is also really good at making a cheeseburger, man. Like if you haven't had an In-N-Out Burger cheeseburger, like man, they do a heck of a job, and they just make cheeseburgers, fries, and milkshakes. That's it. And then they serve soft drinks, but that's it. They don't do anything else, and they just do that really, really well.
Yeah. I also like, this is a really strange thing to say, I reckon, but I really like the way that they have the counter as well. It's not like a McDonald's counter, which almost feels like, it feels weird. It's almost like you're going to a pawn shop or something, a McDonald's counter. But in In-N-Out, it's like really open, and it's like, I don't know, it doesn't feel the same when you go up to order.
Yeah, and you know what? And the burger's fresh. Not that we want to go on and on about it, but the burger's fresh. The onions are crisp. It reminds me a little bit of like a truck stop back in the old Husky truck stops that you used to go to. They had some good food in some of the old Husky truck stops. I don't know if anybody remembers going to a Husky truck stop. There was a good one in Osoyoos that we used to go to all the time. So there you go. That's it for today. That's our news. Hopefully you got some information out of it, and it's worthwhile watching, and we hope to see you back here tomorrow. With that said, we thank you for watching NowMedia.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent. News you can trust.